Hi, I'm Mark Vernarelli, and welcome to Inside Harford County, a program where we sit down with our community leaders and discuss the issues important to the citizens of Harford County. Every year, lawmakers from across the state gather in Annapolis to debate bills, set priorities, and pass a state budget that affects every resident. That gathering, of course, is the Maryland General Assembly. It's now in the final stretch, with the session ending in mid-April. We continue our conversation about issues affecting Harford County, and today we have Senator Jason Gallion, chairman of the Harford Senate delegation, and Harford County Executive Bob Cassilly. Gentlemen, thank you so much both for being here today, giving you a break from Annapolis for a few minutes, not for too long. Mr. Cassilly, as we said on the last show, we have to remind folks that you were a state senator at one time prior to your current job. And
Senator Gallion and I served together for 4 years in the Maryland Senate. Interesting years. It's always interesting down there.
Now, what do you tell the folks who don't maybe pay attention to politics too much about why it's important, the importance of the work of the legislature?
Sure. I mean, look, the legislature meets for 90 days, beginning in January of each year through April, mid-April, and they deal with funding for your schools, funding for our highways, your business laws, your criminal laws, family laws. It's very much impactful to every Maryland resident, and it is important that we all pay attention and take it seriously, not just in election years, but all the time, and have our voices heard down in Annapolis.
Senator, you've been at it for a long time, and you are the chair of the Senate delegation for Harford County. What does that mean in plain English? What's your role in that job?
Sure. So it's great to have that opportunity. There are 3 senators that represent Harford County down there, but have a really good working relationship with the other 2 senators, and also it's working with our counterparts in the House of Delegates. Some counties have their delegation all combined, the House and Senate members. For instance, I also represent Cecil County, and it's a combined delegation between the Senate and the House members. Harford's split up between the Harford senators and the Harford House delegation. So it's been great to work with the chair of the House delegation, Teresa Riley, on different issues that come before us.
Now, you have 4 standing committees, as they're called. What are they? And you're involved in one of them pretty heavily.
Sure. Yeah, judicial, which then Senator Cassilly served on, JPR for short. You have the Finance Committee, which now deals with a lot of the health issues and insurance, stuff like that. And you have Budget and Tax, which deals obviously with that. A few years ago, there was a change in the Maryland Constitution, which gives the legislative branch a little more power with the budget, where it was formerly really driven more by the chief executive or the governor. And then the 4th committee is the committee I serve on. It's Committee on Education, Energy, and the Environment. We call it EEE for short. I'm fortunate to be the ranking Republican on that committee, and my other job, my main job, I'm a farmer, so being the only full-time farmer in the state Senate, it's nice to be on the committee that deals with agriculture issues. So there's, energy is a big issue. I know we're going to probably talk more about that. And it's been interesting these last 4 years since they moved, energy issues moved from finance now to what is now EEE. They kind of changed the portfolio up a little bit. So I've had a crash course in energy now for 4 years, and that is one of the top issues, probably next to our budget deficit that we're dealing with.
Did not realize you're the only farmer in the entire legislature. That's really important for your voice to be heard.
Yeah, now they're actually, there was one appointed to, Delegate Charles Otto passed away, and his replacement's Delegate Kevin Anderson, who's a grain farmer from the shore. So now we have a full-time one on the House side as well, which is nice. Yep.
Mr. Cassilly, one of the big 3 things that we're dealing with is the redistricting, which is could affect the entire state, but particularly, as you said last month, Harford County. What's the update on the redistricting issue?
So that's dead. I mean, I think that's everybody's pretty clear that that's dead. I mean, it was an effort to we got 8 members in the House of Representatives serving Maryland and 1 Republican, and the goal was to take that 1 Republican out. And the Senate refused to go along with this. The House went along with it. The Senate and the governor went along with it. I'm sorry, the House and the governor went along with it. The Senate refused, and so that one's dead. And I think that's a great outcome. A little bit something for fairness, a little bit of altruism there. I would hope to put a nail in that coffin.
Now, we didn't really discuss it too much in depth last time, but the structure of the Maryland legislature, which you're familiar with because you were a senator, we would say that it's modeled after the United States government, but really it's the opposite. They're
really
modeled after us. But
After us.
tell the folks about how it's broken down.
So you have 47 senators, and they're all geographic or portioned by population. So to try to get sort of the same number of people for each senator, and then 141 House members. And again, so each Senate district has 3 House districts within the Senate district. And for Harford County, Senator Gallion represents Harford and Cecil. We have Senator James, who represents a piece of Harford, and then Senator Jennings, who represents part of Harford and part of Baltimore County. So they're not, while the federal government has 2 senators for each state, we used to have that in Maryland, but the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do it that way. They got to be by population. Senator Gallion pointed out, the process of bringing, you can introduce a bill into either the House or the Senate, but it's got to pass both the House and the Senate. You introduce the bills, they get assigned to one of the standing committees that Senator Gallion was just mentioned, and if it gets through the committee, it goes to the floor. If it gets voted on, it goes to the other body, goes back up through their committee structure. If it gets approved by both bodies, goes to the governor for his signature or for his veto. And that's in general, that's the process.
And all of this has to occur and be completed within 90 days.
Within the 90 days.
Which I'm sure, Senator, you'll say is not always easily done.
Right.
You talked about energy. Everybody's mind is focused on the energy bills right now and some other issues related to energy. Where do we stand down there as far as the energy crisis, if we can call it that?
Sure. So it's kind of like Groundhog Day down there. We had these same issues last year. They ended up moving 3 leadership bills through to kind of address some of these issues. And quite frankly, I don't think any of them quite went far enough. So there a lot of ideas are on the table right now. I mean, I've introduced legislation. A lot of other legislators from across the state have. But I think what's going to end up happening is the leadership in the House and the Senate are going to get together and probably come up with maybe one kind of omnibus type bill, and it'll be interesting to see what all is put in that. I had a bill that deals with trying to make sure, like the Empower program is actually saving ratepayers money. So I hope something like that is included in that. The state of Maryland, we import 40% of our electricity. So that's a huge concern. It's been in the news about these transmission lines, the one that they wanted to go from Pennsylvania basically right through Maryland to power data centers in Virginia. That's a problem. So also the regional greenhouse gas initiative, which Maryland is still a part of that. The minority leader, Senator Hershey, had a bill in last week he introduced that would get Maryland out of that. So the way that kind of works, you have their alternative compliance payments. So the fossil fuel generators have to pay into this. It ends up coming out of the ratepayers, though. So if we could get out of that, like Pennsylvania has just in the last couple years, that could save us some money. I mentioned Empower. That's a program that's supposed to help with energy efficient appliances and so forth. And it's like, I don't know, $20-some on your bill. So we'd like to kind of see some reform there to get some real savings. The governor just he didn't come, but his staff presented his energy bill a couple weeks ago, and it, quite frankly, I don't feel it goes near far enough. I mean, it takes it give you like a $40 a year back, which is that doesn't probably do anything. And you have the C fund would pay for that. Now that's a concern. I mentioned there's alternative compliance payments. That goes into the C fund, which their budget this year is using some of that C fund money just to balance the budget. So that's a concern. That's kind of almost like a budget gimmick where we have deficits in the out years, and I feel like they're kind of kicking the can down the road to get past an election year. But we need really good long-term policy to have a sustainable budget, which is what we're hoping for.
Mr. Cassilly, you've heard a lot from constituents about those transmission lines that the senator was talking about.
Yeah. The property owners have been pretty much up in alarm. Those who are impacted by as these power lines come over your properties. And there are a number of bills that we're tracking related to these issues. I mean, they're all, for example, to give property owners greater notice and opportunity to be heard about power lines impacting their property. Others to allow property owners to know earlier on when they're in the entire process. We have a bill to protect that says you can't use eminent domain, the state's power, to take property that's been put in agricultural preservation to run the transmission line. There's even legislation that's seeking, would allow landowners to seek damages if the value of your real property is diminished because running a power line, that you can say, well, it was appraised at $500,000, now it only appraised at $300,000, so they can get damages at $200,000 because of the diminished value of their property. Well, it's a big issue. A lot of folks paying attention to it. I just hope that those folks who are voting in support of these bills are paying attention. We'll find out.
Senator, speaking of both farming and energy, you have a bill, or we're going to introduce a bill to protect agricultural land from solar farms, and yet at the same time allow solar farms to expand. How does that work?
So that's a follow-up from the bills I mentioned last year. You had the three energy bills. One of them had to do with solar siting. And it had some good points in it. It set some guardrails on these large-scale solar projects, like what kind of fencing they had to have up and the trees and stuff to kind of hide them and different things like that. The problem was it allowed for 5% of the priority preservation areas in different counties to go towards these large-scale solar generations, which, you know, is totally overruling local zoning. So you get to that 5% and then local zoning would kick in. I always have an issue when the state's coming down and placing these mandates on the locals. I think they should be able to determine their own zoning. So during that debate last year, and just to put it in perspective, when you hear 5%, what does that number really mean acreage-wise? And this is the argument I used last year and I'm using again this year. Across the state, there's about 2 million acres in these priority preservation areas. So in Harford County, that kind of be like in the northern part of the county, you know, not in obviously the development envelope in the southern part. For Harford County example. But statewide, it's like 2 million acres. 5% of that is 100,000. We try to do a amendment that would cut that down to 2%, which would be roughly 40,000 acres. Now, the way we came up with that number was talking to the Maryland Energy Administration. They said we needed 25 to 35,000 acres to reach our solar goals. So 40,000 seemed pretty reasonable. Unfortunately, that amendment was not accepted. So the legislation I have in this year, the SB 850, we had a hearing on it already, would allow alternatives to drive that 5% number down. So if a county wanted to put solar on less desirable areas like brownfields, warehouse rooftops, stuff like that, that would be like a trade, which would allow that 5% number on prime and productive farmland to go down. So it's not actually reducing our solar goals, but it's allowing counties to have a little more flexibility with how they want to reach those. So I felt like it was kind of a win-win. You still have the same amount of energy that would be put out by those solar installations, but it would put less pressure on our prime and productive farm ground. One concern I have with allowing that much, you know, that 5%, is if you're running an agriculture operation and you're relying on renting ground, it's almost impossible for a farmer that's renting ground to compete with these solar developers. So this kind of, and one last thing on it, you know, the one pushback argument you'd hear on that is, well, shouldn't these landowners be able to do whatever they want with their property? And my answer to that is local zoning matters. If you have a 100-acre farm and say, hey, you know, I'd like to have a hotel right in the middle of it, can't do that because local zoning does not allow that. So with large-scale solar, that's energy generation that should be the same. You know, should be determined by local zoning.
Ms. Cassilly, as far as housing goes, always a push on every front for affordable housing. Yeah. But there's some talk out there, some bills on both sides of both chambers about allowing townhomes in areas that have been traditionally single-family home areas. Right. What are your thoughts on that?
And they're not just traditionally; they're traditionally because they're zoned that way, and that's how the properties were set up. So this is an attempt by the state to just ignore the entire local zoning process, which has been developed with the state approval and blessing for 100 years or so, and to just step in now and, you know, these processes are based upon making sure we have the adequate roads, adequate state roads, county roads, schools, parks, senior facilities, and all that. And so you've developed an area based upon predicted numbers because of the zoning, and the state's going to come in and say, no, now instead of those being single-family homes, now you're going to start interspersing those with townhomes. Well, all the planning the county has done for water, sewer, parks and rec, schools, is all out the window. And the problem I have with this is the state wants to push capacity, more people into the county. At the same time, they're not giving us the same funding they were for our schools. They're not giving us the same funding they were for the roads. Not that we're not even talking about whether they increase it. They continue to decrease funding these things. So it's just so irresponsible for the state to just say, here, we want you to just pack more people in there, and you're going to crowd your roads and crowd your schools and crowd your parks, but we don't care about that. That's outrageous that that's the state's position. If you want to increase density, you've got to increase all the amenities that allow that density to be, appropriate for decent lives. And that's not where the state's going with this, and we push back.
Speaking of roads, how about the gas tax?
Yeah.
And then this talk of a mileage-based vehicle kind of a
Sure.
fee.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the mileage fee is preferred by folks who have lots of public transportation, because it's going to be paid by counties like Harford, where we have to commute and have to take long drives, and the counties that are more around the DC areas that have lots of public transportation and shorter commute distances, maybe not shorter times, but distances, they benefit from it. And so that's just inappropriate. The gas tax money, years ago, we were getting about, I think, almost 20-25% worth of the every dollar in the gas tax to improve our local roads. Well, the state's backed off. Now we get almost no, it's very small, like a couple of percent out of the gas tax for our local roads. So the state continues to pull back on this. It's to our detriment. So again, we're opposed to these efforts that would either increase the gas tax without any notice to the citizens or any vote by the folks, or efforts to tie that into your vehicle miles traveled.
Senator, another huge issue nationwide has been illegal immigration enforcement. Where do we stand now as the session kind of winds down?
Well, they passed a bill earlier, went through both sides to affect the 287G program, which in Harford County, it's a jail-based model. If someone is brought in there on whatever charges, it's some of the questions they ask, were able to cooperate with ICE, with federal immigration that way. So I think there was like a furor down there because a month or so ago you had in the news all the things going on in Minnesota with immigration, and I feel like at the state level, they kind of looked at that and they were just equating Maryland to that, when we haven't had those same issues in Maryland, because honestly things like those 287G programs have worked well in the two counties I represent. We have it in Harford and Cecil. So unfortunately, I think they just got a little over the top with that. Ideally, we'd like to see our locals be able to work directly like that, and it helps, to have a program in the jail, so you're not having the roundups on the street in our counties in Maryland, because they are working well in the program that was already that we had. So it's just unfortunate that you got this furor on the news. And I think they wanted to react to that, and I don't think it was. I think they pushed bad policy to do that.
Mr. Cassilly, I know Sheriff Gaylor has been one of the 3 or 4 most outspoken sheriffs, along with Sheriff DeWeese and Jenkins and Mike Lewis on the shore, most outspoken about this particular issue. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, look, the 287G was a great program, and I agree with Senator Gallion that shouldn't have been deleted. But beyond that, now we're seeing these efforts to gag our law enforcement, and so that they can't cooperate with federal authorities, which is absolutely outrageous. I mean, the public safety that is so important to all of our citizens, that requires immense amount of collaboration between our federal layers of law enforcement, our state, our county, and our municipalities. And for the state to come in and say, well, you county and municipal officials, state officials, you can't collaborate with federal law enforcement officials. That is just the height of irresponsibility. And I absolutely reject the state's pretend authority to do that. In my view, they have no legal authority to do that. and that I will support any effort by our law enforcement to communicate from the county and local level up through federal officials, and won't tolerate anybody's efforts to interfere with that, because public safety is important to everybody, and it shouldn't be politicized. And that's what Annapolis is doing. They're willing to put petty personal politics, national politics, above the safety of our own citizens. And that's a pretty sad day, and that's where we are.
What about juvenile justice reform? We haven't heard as much about that this year, but you have some pointed thoughts.
Yeah, well,
about
that's in the news today. The Senate passed. So one of the big things that they were pushing this year is you have certain offenses that even though you're a juvenile, legally a juvenile, you're charged as an adult because the nature of the offense, you know, shootings, murder, attempted murder, rape, robbery, things like that. And that's important because it guarantees, it assures that those offenses don't get lost and swept into the juvenile process. The juvenile process is overloaded. It's not, you hear people all the time running away with their ankle bracelets on and getting lost. By saying, wait a minute, these are really serious. We're going to start off in the adult system, and now the burden is to say, why should we move this particular person into the juvenile system? We'll start you here and then move you down. Now they're reversing the burden. They're saying, well, we're going to assume you should be in the juvenile system. Now, state, you got to say why we should put them up to the adult system. It's the wrong approach, because the nature of the crime that should drive this, and the nature of the crimes that these apply to are really serious. And so they should start in the adult and then put the burden on the person arrested, whether they're juvenile or adult, to say, yeah, but it should move into this other system. So it's wrong, and it's, again, putting politics ahead of our public safety, and again, I just really reject that approach.
Senator, the one thing that the legislature must do in 90 days, it's mandated, is present and pass a balanced budget. Where does the budget stand right now?
Well, right now, you know, it starts, the governor's budget in the even number years actually starts in the Senate, and the odd number years starts in the House. So actually the Senate will have the first crack at it this year. From what we've seen so far, there's some concerning things with it. I mean, we've heard, you know, it's election year. They're most likely not going to raise taxes this year, which is a good thing. You know, they did raise a bunch of taxes and fees 1 year ago. We had an alternative a year ago, our caucus, that had bipartisan support that would have balanced the budget with no tax and fee increases by trimming state government. I think it was like 5% kind of across the board. They put a cap on Medicaid, like $100,000 per family, and it also kind of slow rolled the Kerwin rollout. So those three things a year ago would have allowed us to balance our budget with no tax and fee increases. Out of 47 senators, there's 13 Republicans. We actually had 5 Democrats that crossed over and voted with us on that amendment. Unfortunately, that still wasn't quite enough. But we showed, you know, being in the minority party, a lot of times you'll hear, well, what's your answer? What's your suggestion? And that was ours, honestly, through the budget process last year. This year's budget that we're beginning to work on, I mentioned them, you know, taking some money like from the C fund to put in. So that's concerning, because it's a short-term fix for a long-term problem. So we're going to be having this. We're going to be back here again next year dealing with these same issues, because they're not dealing with the long-term structural issues. So I wouldn't expect any tax increases this year, but I would expect for them to kind of punt this down the road with, you know, raiding different funds. One thing last year, we have a dedicated fund that funds Project Open Space, Maryland Ag Land Preservation Foundation. And they took $100 million over 4 years, $25 million a year starting this current budget we're in, raided it from that fund to balance our budget. And that fund is a dedicated funding stream that funds that through a transfer tax. So that's really concerning to me when you are raiding dedicated funds just to balance the budget. That's not the right way to do budgeting, but I think you'll see gimmicks like that this year to get us through the election year, and then when we're back dealing with an even bigger deficit next year, you know, everything will probably be on the table.
Mr. Cassilly, you've talked about a property tax exemption for, and hopefully this doesn't happen too often, a spouse whose husband or wife dies during combat duty.
Yeah, so there was a legislation introduced this year, and Harford County sent a delegation of veterans down to Annapolis to testify, and they did a fantastic job. This is to just improve the availability of tax credit to the surviving spouse of a military person who's killed in the line of duty. So it's a great one. I was really proud that we could send a really strong delegation down from Harford County in support of that.
Senator, how can folks get in contact with you, and are you available 12 months a year? You certainly don't work just the 90 days on these issues.
That's right. So, we have our email address is available. Reach out anytime with that. Also, our office phone number. We look for, I try to attend a lot of events year-round and be out in the community as much as possible. Just this past weekend, along with the county executive, we were at a Eagle Scout Court of Honor, and later that day at a volunteer fire company banquet. So we're out and about in the community a lot. But we like to hear from people, so I encourage people, email us, call our office. We love to hear people's suggestions and thoughts on the issues that we're dealing with. And it is, you're only in session the 3 months a year, but you are, dealing with constituent services year-round, and that's a huge part of the job that we really enjoy doing.
Mr. Cassilly, how can folks find out who their legislators are?
Well, you can go to the Maryland General Assembly webpage, and there's a great finder there that allows you to just, click on members and find my representative, and you put in your information. It tells you, here's your senators, here's your senator, here's your delegates, and it's great. They can also, if you got questions, that you can reach out to Harford County as well. Just email our Citizens Affairs at harfordcountymd.gov, citizensaffairs@harfordcountymd.gov, and we'll be glad to provide you information on that as well.
Well, you both have been involved in a very important job in the Maryland Senate, and you must feel like it's probably a big part of your life to know that you're serving people, Senator. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's an honor out of in a state with 6.2 million people to be one of the 47 people that's representing our citizens in the state Senate. It's just an honor of a lifetime. So I enjoy doing it. I enjoy trying to help people out and promote our values, So it's been the honor of a lifetime to serve, and this is my 8th session, so it's time rolls by. As you mentioned, my first term, I had at the time Senator Cassilly sat right in front of me on the floor, and it was good to have somebody from home right in front of me to kind of rely on there as I was learning the ropes. I always appreciated that.
Thank you both for being here today. Best of luck to you, Senator, in the last month of the session. And thank you for watching Inside Harford County, airing exclusively on Harford TV. Please join us again next month. I'm Mark Vernarelli.